Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Uprising. I'm your host, Joshua Void, and today we're going to be delving into something that I love talking about, and that is predominantly about the atheist community. But before we get into this, I do want to thank our Patreon supporters, Linear and TART, for helping us do exactly what we're trying to do, and that is to promote atheism in a new light. So, thank you so much for helping us do that and helping us achieve our goal with having these conversations and bringing new ideas to the forefront. So, thank you. I appreciate it. Now, before I begin, I do want to say that I have two amazing individuals that are with me going to have this great conversation. The first individual that I would like to introduce is Katy Sykes, my co-host. Katy,
Hello,
how are you doing tonight?
I'm fantastic. Bit of a busy day. I've also been on another show. I was on Skeptic Haven earlier, so getting a little bit tired now, but good to be
that
here
is
still.
that is completely understandable. And also being on another show before even coming on to here, I appreciate it very much that you were willing and able to come on to the show. So thank you again. And I would also like to introduce Scott Williamson to the show. Scott, thank you so much for coming on in. It's awesome. Thank you.
Hey, how's it going, Katie and Josh?
That's going
Oh,
great.
it's
Good.
fantastic. Oh,
Fantastical.
fantastic, Kyle, some would say.
hmm
And I would have to say, Linear, thank you so much for pointing that out. We just got two more subscribers. Thank you, fellow subscribers, for coming on and helping us do what we're trying to do, which is show atheism in a different light. Thank you so much. All right. So tonight's show, as I stated, is going to be something that I hold dear, and that is to build a foundation for the atheist movement moving forward. And we had a couple of discussion, or we had a discussion in the background talking about just points about what we would bring up to you, the viewer, tonight. So, without further ado, I think that we should start off with Scott's point, which is how we should deal with the believer in and of themselves, right? So, how should we actually handle the believer who's not necessarily, let's just say, an apologist, but just your one run of the mill theist who believes in Jesus, believes a bit what's written within the Bible, and then just kind of lives their life?
Yeah. So if you look at enough YouTube videos of, say, street epistemology, for example, where someone like Reese Nice-Wonder or Anthony Magnabosco will be about the business of talking to people who would mutually they want to talk about their beliefs. What you realize right off the bat, especially if you keep watching these videos over and over and over, is that people seem to operate based on their feelings about things, which is no big surprise in psychology. Like we all know that we're driven mainly, that's what feelings and emotions are for. They're the driver to get things we want done, right? And so instead of trying to change their mind, what I find is a better, because you got to put them in their reptilian brain. And in their
Yes.
reptilian brain, they're going to be on the fight or flight type of mode, right? So what I would rather do is maybe if they want to speak to me about their religion and we're speaking to somebody about, let's say, Christianity or Islam or what have you, um, there's different tools you can use, like the internal critique, the
Mhm.
outsider's test of faith comes in handy. These aren't very threatening. They're just simply questions that you ask them and they hear themselves answer, and then they're forced to kind of think about some questions maybe they haven't thought about in the past. Like, um, okay, well, you say that you know that God has revealed Himself to you because he gives you a good feeling and he's changed your life. Like maybe like a conversation I had like 2 days ago, the guy said, well, faith comes from hearing. the word of God. And that's how we know God is real. So the question that I asked him was, great, and what well, we kind of decided what denomination he was. Well, suppose a Jehovah's Witness who is incorrect in their theology, right? He's like, yeah.
Right.
Well, what if they told you that they know that the Jehovah's Witness doctrine is correct because they have this feeling and it's changed their life and God revealed himself in those ways? Could they be mistaken? And they'll say, of course they're mistaken because they're Jehovah's Witnesses. Like, great. So is it possible that you could be one of them? Because you're using the very same method that they are. So is that really a reliable method if it can lead you to different beliefs? And they'll say, well, it's more than that. And you just go through all of these things, just ask the important questions. And they may not agree with you, or they may not really say that they've changed their mind, but it forces them to think and ask those questions that maybe this is the first time that they've heard these questions. And so, of course, at first, they're not going to understand how to process the question right. They're just kind of winging it and they're trying to win or whatever. But like, for example, I had one guy, actually, well, I think it was on our show, Katie. We had a person come on and they were a Christian and we went over through our epistemology. And yeah, he didn't move one bit, if you remember. I won't say the name.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, you remember. Didn't move one bit. But then a couple weeks later, he IMs me and says, after reviewing our video, I just kind of cringed listening to my answers. It was just so cringy hearing myself give you these half-ass answers. So I kind of changed my mind and now I'm full atheist. I'm like, wow, that was a big jump. Like,
damn.
So sometimes just asking the questions and giving them time to ruminate on it. Just be patient. Don't be argumentative, because you're not going to get anything that way. They're in their reptilian brain at that point.
Exactly. You make very valid points. So I guess what we're also trying to point out is that there's a lot of atheist communities that are out there that are extremely combative, where they'll swing. And hell, I'm part of that. I'm not even going to lie. I'm part of that community too, that just want to swing and have these type of arguments and debates and stuff like that. But I do think, and I do acknowledge that there are certain people where that does count, where you have to kind of go into a fight against those individuals, or not a fight, but a debate in a sense. But with your normal everyday theist and everything like that, it is better to have a sit down and a conversation with them rather than to kind of show, look, these are all the things that are against you. Why aren't you an atheist and everything? And then from that point, that doesn't win anything, because all that can do is just maybe bring them back into themselves in a sense and have this defensive
dig their heels in. Yeah.
Exactly. So I do think that you are absolutely correct with certain individuals who are just living their everyday lives in a sense and want to have these type of conversations. You have to use a more street epistemologist way in order to get through that defense and kind of meet the theist in the middle in a sense, meet them on a middle ground and on their kind of soil in order to show the how can I say it, the that's not even a word, that the validity that they thought that they had is actually nothing but a feeling rather than some sort of epistemology that we can actually look at and see. Not see, but I mean, we can look at through logic and stuff like that.
Yeah. So there's different. My thoughts on this is, there's different methods. Obviously, we're talking about the epistemology method, but then there's also this combative method as well. And I think it depends who you're actually speaking to as to what method you're going to be using. So epistemology is going to be a lot better, like Scott talked about, with somebody who's just a run-of-the-mill normal theist. who maybe has never even thought about any of this before. But if you're dealing with more combative religious styles, like cults, for instance, then it's a lot more it's a lot more combative, their style of religion in the first place. And sometimes all you're left with is, because you can't actually talk to these people because they're trapped inside the cult, so you can't use epistemology against them.
Mm-hmm.
So all you're left with is to attack the whole thing itself,
Mm-hmm.
and to show
Exactly.
the whole organization up for what it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, too, is based on the volunteerism of the theist who is having the discussion, right?
Mhm.
Because if they are looking for answers and they're the ones that come to you in order to try to have this conversation, then you can have a little bit, let's just say, lighter gloves with those
Mhm.
type of individuals. But if it's more where you're seeing somebody espousing nonsense and you're like, okay, you are the one that I'm going to actually want to have a debate with, because I can see that you're not actually wanting to have a conversation. You're wanting to change people's minds from the reality of things to a delusion. And henceforth, I want to disprove your point. My thing isn't to change the theist who is making all these claims. My thing is to hit the argument so hard that the people who are rallying around the individual see the nonsensical nature of where they're standing. So I think
Exactly.
the beauty of what we're actually having a conversation about right here is that I believe that atheists need to change their mentality in a
Mhm.
sense, not
Mhm.
necessarily because I've been talking constantly about the normalizing atheist perspective and my own outlook, which I'm not a big fan of the normalizing atheist movement. But I do think that there needs to be a different outlook into being happy with who we are in a sense, because instead of wanting the theists to accept us within society, we should be happy about what we are within society, and that if the theist doesn't want to deal with us, then so be it. We're going to continue down our path no matter what, you
Yes,
know.
and here's to kind of go along with that. Just like religious people, we were speaking about on one of our last shows that, Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, when new converts come into, or new study people who are just studying, just introduced to the religion, they'll get love bombed and they'll get all this stuff to kind of woo them into the whole situation. Well, guess what? We can sort of play that game too, but on a more realistic level, like on a more genuine level, by do exactly what you do. You were saying, Josh, not really change your mindset, but just be aware of your behavior in the language you use and in your tonality, how you're coming across. Because once we start putting them into that fight or flight sort of situation,
Hmm.
you're not going to break down that wall. You're only building the wall up. You're helping them build these walls. And so they're like, well, if that's what it means to be an atheist, then I don't want it. It's kind of like if I see atheists be not, one guy, again, um, he couldn't believe that I was a nice person to him. Like I gave him some money. He had asked for some money. He's a theist, knew I was an atheist, and I mean, I'm not saying you need to give money to people or whatever, but the whole
Right.
point is I was just being nice to the guy. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Just be friendly, just be calm, be cool. Don't be so aggressive. And I notice online there's so much, lodging insults at each other and at ad hom attacks and straw man each other.
Hmm.
And it's like I've seen this on atheist and theist side. So
Good point.
it's not helping, but like you said, then you have folks like the Darth Dawkins people. They come along and they're very aggressive and they're trolling and they're, the best way to deal with them, and only for the benefit of those watching, because believe me, people do look at apologists like Darth Dawkins and other apologists out here as the fighters of the faith, they're fighting the good fight, and they're encouraging me because they're defeating these atheists all the time. Atheists don't want to deal with the Darth Dawkins because he's a troll, so they may walk away. The way that the theists will interpret that is, oh, he's doing the good. They don't even want to mess with him because he's winning. He's a winner. He's our champion. He's our jewel. So if you happen to be in a situation where you're talking to a Darth Dawkins or someone like this, who's trolling you and trying to, get you to agree into their premises that you don't, by straw man and by ad hom attacks and all these other things, just change the subject. Can we, I have no metaphysical primary reference to know what is possible and impossible. You are exactly right, Darth. Now, can we talk about Jesus?
Yes.
Did he walk on water? Change the subject. Get it off of that stuff, because that stuff is going nowhere.
Exactly.
It's just, it's begging the question.
I think we can also find some similarities here with politics as well, especially today, with how volatile politics has become, not just in the USA, but in the UK and other countries as well. And I mean, I see this being from the UK. I've seen a lot of this in the Brexit debate, where it's become a very antagonized debate with a lot of misinformation and a lot of, well, we won. We're winning, you have no good points. We've won that, so we're going to do things our way now. Doesn't matter how much we've messed up the country. We're the winners here. Whereas what really should have been happening, and when politics works well, is when the other side can come up with some ideas on how to make things better, can come up with some problems that people have and provide solutions for those problems. And these debates online between atheists and theists, nothing's actually getting resolved at the end. It's just exactly the same. Like you said, Scott, it's all about, who's going to win this debate, who's going to come out on top. No one's actually providing any day-to-day problems that both theists and atheists could be having, and then providing solutions for how they could, better that within society.
Exactly. Both of you hit very good points when it comes to how to really look at the conflict when it comes to politics, because a lot of times also what a lot of people don't necessarily think about is that the two are kind of intertwined into one, where when you look at politics, it has religious aspects within them, either a lack thereof or a lack of or having religious ideologies and tendencies within the religious formulations of the political, either right or left or center, in a sense. So when we're really looking at this, we need a kind of movement that is able and willing, in a sense, to direct a path that is combative when necessary, but predominantly inclusive, in a sense, in order to show individuals that, look, this is something that is new. We're not going to be sitting here behind computers, or in the future, I mean, we're not going to be sitting here behind computers just having conversations. The larger part of the movement is getting on the ground, in a sense, and actually building things from the ground up so that we have certain ways that we can have actual discussions with people on the streets, in a sense, in order to actually bring people who have questions into facilities that are beneficial, in a sense, for that milieu, in a sense. But before I continue, I do need to bring up what Linear stated, because I do agree with it. Not sure if someone like Darth would let you just change subjects, though. And I think she is kind of right, where Darth would want to put you in that corner. But I think, too, Scott, you have a point as well, that if you keep trying to move the conversation forward, he will have no choice at some point but move the conversation forward. So if you're agreeing with that one point, even though that you don't agree, but just to move the conversation forward, he might think that that's a victory. But the whole entire point is that he doesn't want to get into the crux of the Jesus conversation.
Yeah.
Because as soon as we get into that, then we can see the problematic formulations that could come from that.
Yeah.
So
If he doesn't let you change subjects though on that, sorry Scott,
Mhm.
but yeah, if he doesn't let you change subjects, change the subject, and he tries to fight up against that, and he does that consistently throughout the whole thing, then he's hurting his own argument at that point. Because now those same people who are like, oh, he's winning, he's always winning, he destroys them, are suddenly realizing, well, why doesn't he want to talk on this other issue?
Right. That's the whole point. Yeah, because what Christian wouldn't want to talk about Jesus? Why would you not want to talk about Jesus? That seems to be the whole point of apologetics, is to get the person to move into talking about Jesus. So for me, when it comes to a Darth Dawkins, I just give him whatever he wants. If he says, "Sir, as an atheist, you have no metaphysical grounding to know what's possible and impossible, so how can I trust you?" Now I'll just say, you know what, Darth, you're exactly right, man. It's epistemic circularity. I understand what that means and understand that it is a fact. I understand the problem of inference. You're right. Like, I don't know everything. I really don't have a grounding to know everything. And so since you do, because you've grounded yourself into the mind of God, tell me more about Jesus. And if he keeps on wanting to say, yeah, but we need to get back to the meta, like, look, I've already told you, you're right on that. Like, I have no metaphysical grounding for my morals or whatever it is you want to bring up. I agree with you. It's all subjective to me. Now, can we now talk about Jesus?
right.
You keep doing that, his audience is going to catch on. Oh, this guy's a one-trick pony. This guy's not seriously into saving souls. He's mainly into trolling people, and this is the only thing he's got. And so you
Yes.
sort of defeat him that way too.
Yo, big time, big time. I think you're absolutely right. So I think what needs to be, I guess, what you can say, enforced within the atheist community is the sense of not just throwing insults at the theist, but to build up your epistemology in such a way that you're able to actually utilize some sort of Socratic method when it comes to having these kind of conversations. And it's kind of like a book that I've been reading as of now, which is written by Peter Boghossian.
Oh, Peter Boghossian.
Boghossian. There you go. Yes. And what he's stating is that there are even though that atheists are a small portion of the world's population, they still have a lot of individuals that, if practiced, can all be kind of street epistemologists in a sort of certain way, or maybe not all, but a portion of them could be. And if that is the case, then you can have a lot more people having larger conversations with the general populations, and slowly but surely starting to reveal to people the circularity within their kind of thought process, but not only that, but the irrationale of their said thought process. So I think that's a very good way to move forward as well, is that there needs to be more emphasis on street epistemology, at least within the atheist community that wishes to debate or have conversation. I think that's the big point.
I think it also needs to be built up in a way, it's a bit like an organization. So you have some people who are skilled at, say, street epistemology and will deal with, that side of it, but then also have other people who have an interest in, say, politics and sociology and psychology and things like that are able then to work on other things as well, while the street epistemologists are working at their side of the whole thing.
Very good.
Organized. Big time. I would completely agree with that. And let alone have individuals that, when it comes to just apologists and stuff like that, that we can have individuals that can also confront and combat those apologists as well. Because the street epistemologist isn't really coming off as combative. We're kind of meeting people in the middle ground, or even on their terrain, in a sense. But when it comes to debates, then that's a completely different story, because you don't want to be on that debater side, technically, because then after already you kind of conceded the point, and maybe one certain individuals over or solidified, let's just say, certain people that were kind of on the fence onto that other person's side as well, and let alone you get backlash from your own side for not necessarily battling as hard in order to promote a point that or what that debate was about. So I think that there needs to be a multifaceted outlook when it comes to atheism and the, I don't want to say confrontation. Confrontation is too big of too harsh of a word, but when it comes to dealing with the theists, because just like how the theist is multifaceted, we must also be multifaceted within our ways of engaging and dealing with theists that are out there as well, and let alone with engaging with ourselves. Our community is so fractured at the moment; it's insane.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, just right along what you said, it just triggered me, is that this is for everybody, not just theists versus atheists. This is for the atheists too. This is for everybody in every walk of life can benefit from, is to know what are the best tools that we have for arriving at the most sound conclusions or the most proper beliefs. We can determine what it is we want, like what is our values, what is our goal as a community. Would we agree that the well-being of most people and to mitigate as much suffering as possible, is that really the goal we should all agree on? And if we can get enough people to agree to that, and I think we can, I think most people will agree to that, and it's just that people have different ways of going about it. And so what we have to understand, though, is now the world is changing at an incredibly unhealthy pace, unfortunately. From everything I've read, all the data points, all the things that I've ever looked into, our society is changing at such a fast pace, people can't adapt to it. Like there's people who spent, 40, 50 years understanding words to be one thing, to mean one thing. Then you've got all of a sudden within a year, 2 years, 3 years, these issues that are very important, by the way, come up that people aren't used to dealing with. And it's unfortunately that they can't evolve or understand because they feel put upon or they feel this or that. So what's happened in that case is that, at the same time, parallel to that issue, we have the internet growing. Now, I would say one of the biggest forms of commodities out here is no longer just money. Now it's about information. Who holds the information? Who controls the information? Who controls the language? Who controls the verbiage? Who controls the information that you receive? Who are the fact checkers? All of this stuff is important because people need to realize that suppose we were to get like a crazy Donald Trump or even worse type of person in office, and then they wanted to push their agendas, through the social engineering, like through our social media, the news feeds, this and that. Do people have the critical thinking skills strong enough to, make right decisions and avoid the influence of social media? For example, the Russian bots. People are saying, well, let's blame the Russian bots for why the people elected Trump or whatever the case was, right? Well, what sort of is being implied in this is that people can't think for themselves. People are little automatons that listen to robots, and their decisions are made based on Russian bots. That's a sad implication if you think about it. Like, do you make your decisions daily because of what you read on the internet? Guess what? Many people do. Unfortunately.
But
So maybe we as a community can sort of address these sort of things, you know.
But sadly, it seems as humans that we do base our beliefs a lot of the time off of influences. I mean,
Yep.
I was having this conversation earlier in the show that I did earlier on with Skeptic Haven about gender neutrality and a society with gender neutrality. And one of the points that I made was that in some of the studies that I've looked at, it was being proven that children as young as 7 seem to be already extremely influenced by gender norms, to the point where you've got girls saying that they'll never be as good as boys, that they just never will achieve the same as boys, that they're weak and that they're not intelligent, and that the only things that they can ever aspire to being is cute. And then you've got boys as young as 7 turning around saying, well, we're the best, we're boys, girls can't do what we do. And biologically speaking, there is absolutely no reason for that, other than it's a learned behavior that was taught to them by parents and teachers and society as a whole. So it seems like that humans are very influenced. So one of the things that we should be focusing on is how do we start to change society in a way that gives the right influences, that teaches people and influences people in a way that gets rid of influences in a sense, so that people are able then to think for themselves truly again without being pushed one way or the other.
I completely agree with that. I do. But I think that the one thing that we got to also realize too is that there are certain implications when we actually do talk about biology in the sense, and when we do talk about the physiology of both women and men, for instance. And there are certain things that are pros and cons for both in a sense. And I think that what we need to look at is to talk truth. I think that's the first thing, to talk truth, because there are certain implications that I see where it can, because we don't want either or side thinking one is the best over the other. We're trying to actually look at
Work together,
humanity as a whole and make it kind of cooperative, not necessarily combative.
Right.
So the thing is that we need to embrace our differences and say, yes, in certain ways, maybe there are differences, right? But that doesn't mean that I am better than you because of those differences. Because we can both intertwine together in a sense, and you utilize what you're good at, I utilize what I'm good at, and we together can reach for something better, rather than I'm better than you should follow me, or I think that I'm better than you should follow me.
Right. Reptilian brain.
I agree. But I'd also like to just point out that I don't think framing it as embracing your differences is the right way to go. I mean, yes, we should realize that we are individuals, but that individualism will come at the end of it. If you give everyone the ability to make their own choices, then they will be individuals. They will naturally embrace the differences. What we need to be doing as a society is we need to be working towards embracing the similarities, looking at where we are more similar to each other, and focusing on that, because that's going to be the best way to achieve full equality, where everyone has the ability to do what it is that they want to do.
Yes, but and then after, actually, before I even start, Scott, go ahead, and now I'll come after you.
I was just gonna say I agree 100%. And one of the things that wouldn't be a bad thing is to try to live in someone else's shoes for a while. I mean, if you can't really do it for real, I mean, at least try. Like try to join. If you have a problem with gender neutral people, or trans people, try to join their groups and talk to them and get to know them and make friends. And you're going to learn really quick that they're just people with so many similarities like you, that you can't hate these people. It's going to it's going to change your feeling about things, which is the driver for your decisions. So part of what's going to help us all come together is if we just start to, you know, join each other, you know, get in each other's shoes a little bit. Like, if you have a problem with black people, you know, a lot of people in America have problems with black people. They just do. White people, right?
Mm.
And vice versa. Black people just can't get along with white people. It goes both ways. Um,
Mm.
how could we help this situation? Well, try to hang out with more diverse people. Try to widen your social net a little bit, you know, like try to get out and understand people, talk to people, and you're going to learn really quick how many similarities we have. And then we're going to make better decisions as people if we all did that. But as long as we're in our own echo chambers and we're only in our little echo chamber to, you know, motivate each other to hate on abortion people or hate on free choice people or hate on, you know, whoever. I mean, people define themselves by who they hate, which is really sad.
That is true.
I like
Yeah.
what you're saying because it's empathy, isn't it? And I mean, empathy is one of the strongest emotions, in my opinion, because it's the one emotion which allows you to feel somebody else's emotions. And then that allows, you know, their emotions then to influence your own emotions. And if everyone's doing that, then it's a much more unison emotional system which we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I mean, because I completely agree with what you both are saying. But at the same time, I think that we are kind of missing one aspect. And that's why I say we need to live with, or not we need to, but it's better to be truthful in a sense about certain differences, right? Because
of course.
there are certain differences, like let's just say Serena Williams, one of the best, not even one of the best female tennis players in this world at this very moment, and probably maybe not of all time because we haven't seen what the future can give, but at least for now, she's the best tennis player. But the thing is that just like how we measured or whatever, a male tennis player that's at the lowest extent of the professional range or whatever of tennis can hit harder than she can and faster than she can, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we really look at is that it's not that, oh, okay, there's some sort of how could I say it, social constructionism that's there. There are actual physiological differences and biological differences when it does come to this to the same sexes and stuff like that. But that's why I said that we should embrace our differences, because there are certain things that are different.
Yeah.
But you're talking in a very specific area when it comes to like sport.
No, absolutely. But I mean, they are still drastic in a particular way.
And my idea on gender neutrality isn't talking about the physical side of things. It's not talking about that. I mean, obviously, after puberty, there is big differences between the male and the female body. And I mean, that's not on a whole. I mean, there is some men that are weaker than some women and stuff like that. But, you know, when it comes to sport, when everyone's pushing right to be the best that they possibly can, then certain sports, tennis for one of them, the men are going to be, you know, hitting harder and faster.
Right.
You know,
maybe you know, like Katie's saying, you know, acknowledge the differences in those respects. Maybe one thing we can do with that is to just have teams that are separated by their situation. Like if you're a trans man, then have a trans man competition between all trans people, or you know, something like that. I don't know.
No, I disagree with that. I mean, I've had this conversation with people before, and you know, I completely disagree because, you know, for one, trans people make up 1.6% of the population.
True.
How is it ever going to happen?
Exactly.
You're basically just excluding them with that.
Yeah, I see.
I mean, in a utopian world where everything
I see what you.
that would be a brilliant idea. Yeah.
No, you were brilliant to bring that up because I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about the numbers and stuff.
I feel what you could do is you could have, instead of separating it by gender, separate it by ability.
Yes.
So that makes sense.
find a way of categorizing specific
Mhm.
ability, specific strengths, things like that.
Mm.
So and then having it mixed within that, so you can have women with men in the same sport. There's but their ability is at the same sort of level.
Mhm. There you go.
Right, right. No, I
Yeah.
completely agree.
I
But
can agree to
but
that.
for
Yeah.
instance, like a lot of individuals, because on the social, and that's why I stated on the social issue, I'm 100% in agreement. When we're talking about social issues and people and women looking down on themselves because they weren't born male or whatever the situation may be, that is where the problem does lie. And I agree with you. That is where the problem does lie, because everybody should have a chance at trying to achieve whatever they have within their minds and whatever goals and dreams that they have, if it's not about hurting people, obviously.
Mhm.
But if you're looking at more of the physiological aspects, like as I was discussing beforehand, even when it comes to fighting, like MMA, boxing, these type of things, now we start to run into that difficult range. Now, it's not necessarily like, I'm definitely not talking about trans issues or anything like that at the moment. I'm just talking about women and men, for instance, coming together and going at each other within these sports. These sports are highly violent and men do have a higher tendency for violence than women do, or whatever. It's just the case. So, and also have a lot more power behind their punches, let's just say, when it comes to boxing, right? So even though that you can look at boxing and say, well, you can have the lowest, not the lowest, but let's just say the weakest boxer fight against a woman boxer, and that might be like the highest, not the highest, that's not at all, but the strongest woman boxer at this very moment, and that would be actually pretty impressive. But the higher you start to go throughout the ranks, you start to see that there's a huge discrepancy that's there. And that's why, for me, for instance, it's also the way that I grew up as well, I'm not going to lie. But for me, I've never looked at a woman and seen like a threat, for instance. And that might be, for me, that might be just the way I grew up. But
Well,
and
yeah,
also my
that's
size.
see,
But
this is the thing that what you're getting at is really you're not really talking about the trans issue at this point. You're actually talking about freedom of speech and language, like how you sort of, I mean, how you sort of view things is dependent is emergent from your past, how you were raised, your experience, things like
oh,
that.
big.
So if the culture comes in all of a sudden in one day and says, now you can't think like that anymore because it's not good, then there could
But I
be a
get.
little resistance there to actually fight against that. But I think the antidote to that
Hmm.
again is going to be understanding the similarities, making friends with people that are of different, these different demographics. Then you kind
Oh,
of
big time.
understand, a lot better, and then you can kind of make a more natural decision at that point.
Oh,
But
big
as it
time.
is now, we're just in our echo chambers and everybody's just
Yeah.
sort of encouraging each other to hate on the other groups. That's not really productive. It,
Agreed.
you know what I'm saying?
There's
I
there's
can
two
see
there's
that.
two areas that I'd like to point out that just jumping off of what you were saying there, Scott, and that is two areas in which I think that we could actually really start to make a difference as atheists, as a society, is by firstly parents, bringing up their kids in a way which manifests these ideas of
Hmm.
equality, free will, and the similarities, drawing on the similarities between people, and schools also working at doing this as well. Because of the the upbringings, like Scott mentioned, with people of like our generation, then there's probably not a lot that you're going to be able to do to fully change everybody's mind on this and to make people see it this way. But if you start at a young age with the next generations coming up, and you show them the logic behind it all, then they'll start teaching their kids and so on, and eventually, a few generations down the line, we'll have managed to change society for the better.
Something I wanted to bring up on that point too, that we have to think about, especially when it comes with people of our generation. This stuff is happening overnight, essentially for us, because we spent the majority of our years, and I'm like 50 something years old right now. So all of this is very new to me, but thank God I have an ability to reason on things and I'm not left behind. But the one thing I can sort of understand with the people of my generation, they're not really understanding a lot. They feel forced. One thing that I want to let them understand is that we want to assimilate as a society, because one thing we don't want that will really cause division is if the government has to come in like a big brother and tell you what language is appropriate, what language is not. Now you're talking about angry sides. Now you've taken that already divided issue and you've raised it to the level of civil war. You know what I mean? Like it's not really productive to have to take it to an authority like the government to regulate our speech. And not only that, it starts to disintegrate our freedoms. And this affects everybody, regardless of what side you're on. You don't want your freedoms. You don't want the government to just keep expanding, and your rights keep, decreasing. So what we need to help people of our age understand is, look, we need to the N-word, remember the N-word. No, we didn't need the government to regulate that. Society and culture did that just fine. We know for the most of us, we don't use the N-word. We don't say certain words because they're offensive to certain people. We didn't need the government to enact a law. All we needed was our culture to come together and discuss it. And that's what we need to do with all of these issues. We need to handle it in the same way. That's just my opinion. But I think for that, it's going to take understanding our similarities.
Oh,
yeah.
no,
I think a good example of what you're saying there, Scott, is to do with culture, is the Scandinavian countries. I mean, they've made massive strides on this over the past few decades on social change within their countries. And some of the things that they're now working with and developing is just fantastic.
I know. I completely I see it a little differently, though. I do agree.
Okay.
The thing that I see, though, is that just like with, as you stated, with the N-word, for instance, or even just the assimilation of Black individuals into society, that did actually start because of government, though. If we really look, if it wasn't for Dwight E. Eisenhower for allowing the first integrative Black schools and stuff like that, that would still probably be a contentious issue within the South. But because he put that as one of the laws that individuals should not be discriminated against because of skin color and stuff like that, we did actually have the first integration of Black and white schools within the United States of America, within Mississippi at the time.
But that didn't come without social change first. I mean, there was social change before he did that.
Sometimes it doesn't happen with social change.
Well,
sometimes it happens with government, and then social changes come from government and actions.
Well, with this situation that you're mentioning, you have to understand too that there were a lot of movements going on before the government even jumped into action. Martin Luther King was already marching. Malcolm X was already marching and protesting
within the 1960s. You're correct.
In the 60s, and
but
also
this is the 1950s,
right? But what I'm saying is that you had a lot of groups, including there was a lot of support from white people. Other white people that were doing a lot of things. The Jewish community was helping out, going into. And doing these protests, like you've seen the pictures where they would sit at the bar and not move with the Black people. Like, we're not going to let him get thrown out, for sitting in the wrong area or whatever.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
Staying with busing, sitting on the back of the bus, all of these things, there were movements addressing these issues. And it came to a certain point where the government decided it needed to get involved. Now,
Right.
government can also do a lot of bad things at the same time.
Mhm.
That's the problem. They can do a lot of misguided things in the name of doing good things, but that's a whole nother show. I've got a whole list of things
Right.
in history
Don't
that the
get me wrong.
government's done.
I agree. I agree. But we also have to look at how certain things actually were beneficial that the government did put
Oh
forward. And if
yeah,
it was left to
absolutely,
citizens and to culture in
absolutely.
certain areas, we
Hmm.
would have had definitely a different story to tell even today, for
Hmm.
instance. But
Hmm.
because government acted in a particular way, that it actually ended up better for minority individuals in a sense.
In
But what
some
I would
ways, yeah.
also state too, just to push back on the Scandinavian aspect, is that Scandinavia, yes, is one of the most, if you look at statistics based on the most happiest, if you look at statistics, look at the most, well, I forget what the other one was. It's the most happiest, it's the most, I
Healthiest.
think, yeah, healthiest and everything like that. Scandinavia definitely takes the
Mm.
cake.
Also, the
However,
most
we also
atheist.
need to look at Scandinavian numbers
Hmm.
in a sense because they're altogether they're close to like 20. They're not even close to Canada's numbers,
Yeah.
right? In population, and also they don't have a lot of minorities within Scandinavia,
Can I
and
jump
that's
in
the
here?
number one thing that we need to look at is
This is
that
the
it's
thing, though. To Katie's defense,
go ahead.
I will say this, and this goes on my conservative side too, is that this is exactly why you don't want to implement anything on a national level like that. You want to keep it on the state level because it's more manageable, it's more
Yeah.
effective. Look at Canada. Like, for example, I think they had a libertarian governor, whoever in Canada, no, not Canada, I'm sorry.
No worries.
What was that state? Washington, I think it was.
Mm.
I worked with a guy. He owned his own computer store in Washington,
Mhm.
and he moved there and we worked together. Anyways, he was telling me that, they did a pilot program for
Mhm.
UBI, Universal Basic Income. They did this thing, and according to the studies, you would actually save more money than you spend on your current social nets and insurances and things of that nature, right? And if you can just knock it down to a lump sum that everyone gets, regardless of whether they're working or not, you're going to save so much money. But at the same time, it's going to increase capitalism, which is going to be the engine of the market and all of this
Agreed.
stuff. Now, the opponents were saying, "Oh, that's giving people free money. They'll stop working. They'll stop, doing all these things because their people are generally like pigeons. You
Right.
feed them, they'll hang around all day." Nothing like that happened. Actually, my friend, for example, he said, I started that extra $1,000 I got a month. I was saving that stuff because I was already working, making good money. So I just took that extra money and I put it in my business. And I
That's
developed a computer store. And a lot of his friends started their own businesses based on UBI and a lot of different things. Homelessness went down, crime went down. There
interesting.
was
I
a lot
definitely
of,
need
and
to
it
look that up.
saved money. Like there was, because there was no longer any real welfare sort of situations anymore. The UBI was supposed to replace that. And so it gave people more, plus they didn't have to, plus the poor people actually got out and worked because,
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
It
because,
takes away the stigmas involved with welfare and everything, and it takes away it
and it
empowers people
there you
through
go. It
a
gives them more
non-means
money.
tested benefit. Yeah,
See, he was a libertarian, so his principle was, we believe people know how to handle their money better than the government does. People know in their situation how to handle their life better than the government understands their life. So if you just give them the money, they'll do the right thing. And that's kind of counterintuitive, and it's against the what we usually think, but it actually turned out that
yeah.
way. So
But it's not
I'm
counterintuitive though for anyone who's actually lived on benefits. I mean, I've lived on benefits for quite long part of my life because of mental health conditions and traumas and things like that. And throughout my whole time on benefits, there would be nothing more than I'd want to do than to get off of benefits, to be able to have enough money come in so that I would be able to start my own business and move off of that benefit system into earning my own money. And that's the same for the majority of people who are stuck on these benefits. They do want to better themselves. They just don't know how under a means-tested system where they have to, jump through hoops and prove things to different, organizations and things, and ask permissions for stuff and things like that. They never get anywhere because of that.
In the States, if you are on welfare and you're getting just enough for you to feed you and your kids, if you even try to go out and get a job, they take all your benefits away. And your job is only paying minimum wage, which isn't even what you made off the benefits. So you'd be stupid to get off the benefits at that point. You have kids to feed. And the government here is providing you enough money to make it. But the problem is, it's just enough money to keep you poor for the rest of your life. With UBI, it gives people an opportunity to go still search for a job, even though they're still getting the benefit of $1,000 a month.
Now, there is an issue with the UBI that I do want to address, and this is a thing that Guy Standing, who's one of the pioneers of the universal basic income idea, one of the things that he put forward was that it should not replace benefits. This should be something which is basic. This is no questions asked, underneath the whole lot. Then you get your benefits on top of that. So all this does is provide food, warmth, clothing, rent. That's it. That's all this provides. And then your benefits come on top, and that is that you've then got all your basics covered. So then you can move off and develop your life in whichever way you want to.
I completely agree. I just need to go and actually get my charger because I thought my computer was going to do a lot better than this. So I'm going to go get my charger. I'm going to put my thing on. If you guys want to continue having the conversation, because I do have something to say about universal income. And then after that, just like how Linear stated, she wants to know also, before the show is over, could you please summarize what the Atheist Uprising will offer to the atheist community? And I'll delve into that afterwards. So if you guys want to still continue that conversation, that's awesome. I'll put myself as a thingamajigger. Bow. There you go.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense, because if they have their benefits plus the basic income, then they would be so empowered to just go get a job, and then they would just need, then they could get off the benefits. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think for each state, they can sort of decide what works for their particular economy and situation, if they can afford it or not, without causing greater harm. But I don't see how it would. And I think states, for what they spend on so much crap, and not to mention that a lot of and in fact, it's so much that there's so much corruption. Like even in Mississippi, I was reading this thing, and when the government gives them money so they can do certain things for charities and different things, they hoard the money for themselves. The politicians do. And people have gotten caught doing that stuff, and it's kind of rampant in the States now with these corruptions. But but that's always kind of going to happen, I guess. That's just part of human nature,
There was one doctor's paper I was reading a while back who did a paper on universal basic income, and he'd worked out that for the majority of first world governments, all they'd have to do is add 1 or 2 pence to the tax rate. And they'd make back all of the money that they were going to spend on universal basic income in the first place.
Wow.
So those who were working, they would get their money, then they'd pay a little bit back out of the money that they're being given, and then that pays for the whole lot.
There you go. Oh,
now that's very interesting. But the one thing that I'm looking at, because when we're talking about universal basic income, what are we actually really talking about with that? Does that mean that everybody gets the same amount, the same sum, and let
Hmm.
alone is it on par with inflation?
So
Because at
this,
this very moment, if we were looking at universal income, it would need to be on par with
With
inflation, and
inflation.
yeah, I
inflation.
mean, this is a good point, and this is well within the realms of economics, and I think it's something that that three economic experts would
Yeah.
have to talk about. But
Yeah.
I mean, thinking about it, it's I mean, firstly, what is it for? Well, it is. There's different models. Some
Hmm.
models say it's for everybody. And because it's non-means tested, so the whole idea of being non-means tested would suggest it is for everybody.
Hmm.
That's why I go with the model of it's for everyone, no matter how rich or how poor you are,
Hmm.
you get exactly the same. But as you start moving up through tax brackets, you start paying more towards it back in taxes.
Hmm.
So it sort of equals it back out again. So those on the lowest incomes, in essence, are getting more than those on the highest incomes.
And I want to bring up another model where that tax, well, they increase for inflation and it's being paid for by a robot tax. I think that's the one that Andrew Yang ran on here in the States, was that he was going to pay for it through automation tax. Like all these companies are automating. So he was saying the first people that would go onto the UBI would be people who lost their jobs to automation, couldn't find a different field to get into. Well, the UBI could help them pay for college in training or trade school or something like that. And so he was thinking that the money for it could be paid from, and that would help the companies, because think about it, companies pay out workman's comp, health insurance, all your benefits, plus sick time, annual time, all that stuff. With a robot, you don't have to pay for anything. You pay for one lump sum, you get your robots, and they all automate everything. So they're just making nothing but net profit. They're not
That is
having to
very
pay for
true.
a workforce, so they can definitely put a tax on those robots. And
Absolutely, but
It's
I
a
think
fantastic
too,
idea.
the issue is, right, is that housing prices are rising. We know
mhm,
this. There's also rising within food costs. There's rising within a lot of things, mostly within the economy today, and everything like that. And universal basic income, just for people to have a basic livable standard or whatever, would be around $20 or more per hour, right? Just to have all these things come together properly. Now the problem is with inflation as well. That means that you're going to constantly keep on moving up with inflation, because the more money that is being pumped within the system,
mhm,
that means the more inflation rises.
mhm,
If
mhm.
inflation continues to rise, that means the income has to continue to rise, meaning you're creating more debt.
Yeah, but
So the
isn't that
whole entire
already the
point
case with
is,
benefits? I mean, benefits already have to increase, and a lot of the time they don't increase enough, and we see the damage that that's doing to people who were worse off, worse off than anyone else 10 years
Mhm.
ago, are now at crippling levels of poverty, to the
Right.
point where they're having to choose between heat and food. I mean, it should
No, I,
not be
I
a choice
completely agree with you.
anyone has to make.
I agree with you, but I think there's a better system though than universal healthcare. Not healthcare, sorry, universal income. And with that being stated, is I like to look at the Singaporean system, because the Singaporean system is actually one of the best systems that I've seen so far when it comes to actually benefiting their people, and at the same exact time having individuals living with rich people and still being able to thrive within
Mhm.
Singapore. Where when we look at places with universal income, for instance, or places such as the Scandinavian countries, I
Norway, yeah.
slowly but surely start to see that the more you start integrating minorities into those places, the more what you would see is combativeness, just like how we're seeing with Denmark right now, just like how we're starting to see with Sweden, just like we're starting to see even in certain aspects within Finland, right? And this is the thing that causes major conflicts and problems, because people aren't necessarily used to dealing with minorities as with the United States and as with Canada. The Scandinavian countries are not used to that. And that's why you're starting to see more of a right-leaning Scandinavian, how could I say it, politics coming out from the ether, was because of that. But all in all, that's not why I'm trying to push back. The whole entire point that I'm trying to push is that we need to think where people who are on benefits are still going to be okay, but at the same exact time, for people who want to work and stuff like that, and not just people who want to work, the people who are also up on the echelon are all kind of helping each other out within this type of system. And I don't know if universal income is going to do that. Whereas the Singaporean system does seem to be the best system that can actually do that, and has been doing that to close to 60 years at the moment. And that's the whole entire thing where I'm trying to promote a more basic type of Singaporean system for everybody to, if you want to earn more, and because you're now a rich CEO, for instance, you're not going to be putting people in poverty, because in Singapore, that's extremely hard. There's 87% of people within Singapore own their own homes.
No,
That is the largest out of all other places within the world.
Yeah. I don't think, though, with universal basic income, that anyone's sort of suggesting that we stop people from earning what it is that they want to earn. So, people can still, if they become, want to work up to become a CEO of a company and earn more than anybody else, then there's nothing stopping them from actually doing that.
Right.
Okay.
It's about providing a basic level. So it's about human rights. You as part of our human rights, we have the right to heat, we have the right to food, we have the right to water, we have the right to a roof over our head. But the thing is a lot of people cannot afford any of those rights, so they're left having to beg on the streets, or choose between food and heat, or between a roof over the head or water to drink. And whereas if we were to give them a basic level, a basic barrier that they cannot drop below, they cannot get worse than that, because that is provided to them, from birth onwards. This is provided to them. This is a right that they have to that money. That means that they'll never have to go without any of those things, unless they choose to. Of course, they could be given the money and they could squander it all and, be left with nothing.
Just like they do now.
But at least the opportunity was there for them to have their basic needs cared for.
No, I mean, there are certain things that I do think are beneficial with universal basic income. I think that there are certain things, but I think that there's a lot more that needs to be kind of like rounded out.
Well, also keep in mind
too,
too,
trials haven't been very many at the moment.
Right. That's another problem. Not enough trials and stuff like that. But keep in mind too that automation isn't going away. It's just going to increase more and more. I mean, if you think, maybe 30, 40 years from now, I mean, everything might be driven by AI machines that can do everything. So they can do, work for doctors, surgeries, nursing, just about everything. Everything is going to be automated because people want to save money, and people want the best that they can get and create the best products and create the best, economies and the best this and the best that for science and research and all kinds of stuff. And so what you've got is a lot of human beings that are going to lose, that could possibly lose jobs because of that. Like eventually in every sector. Maybe it's only, trucks are automated. Maybe it's just trucking for now. But imagine 40, 50 years from now, there could be automation on everything. And then what are we going to do for a living?
No,
You know.
that is definitely true, and these are things that we're definitely going to have to think about for the future, in a sense. And let alone, that's one of the reasons why I want to, like, just for the Atheist Uprising, what it will
Mhm.
do for the atheist community. The
Mhm.
first thing was to have conversations such as these, so that we can slowly but surely start to flesh out the ideas that are out
Yeah.
there, because there are great ideas that are out there in order to really promote a how could I say it, in order to benefit the community, and not just the community, but the world community as a whole. So for instance, what I look at is, or what the atheist uprising is trying to do and trying to espouse, is new ideas that can make people think about what is going to come in the future, because automation, just like how Scott Williamson stated, is coming at us, and it's coming at us quick and fast, and we need to find a way in order to either, it's not going to be blunted, but to deal with the ramifications of those. The next thing is based on families and stuff like that, and how can we look at the family of the future, for instance, and how can we make things for atheists that can make a better, let's just say, because we do know that within households that are fractured, sometimes it's very difficult to take care of one's children and stuff like that. Not all the time, but some of the times. And we need to really provide these conversations on how to actually take care of our children and for future
Mhm.
generations and everything like that. And that's what the Atheist Uprising is really trying to offer, are really good conversations such as these that you heard tonight, in order for viewers to mull over and everything like that. And slowly but surely, what we want to try to do is hit the agriculture sector, because the agriculture sector is one of the biggest sectors that we should be thinking about. More food on the table means more abundance. If we can have more
Mhm.
abundance of food, then what is the benefit is that food prices will drop based on the abundance of it, in a sense, or of certain products and stuff like that. So what is the best way of looking forward? I I advocate for vertical farms, for
I,
instance, and let
I
alone
have
Mhm.
one in my house, so
right, right,
Wow.
and
very
at the
useful.
same time, sorry, and at the same time too, I advocate for the more Amsterdam style, where it is industrialized for better communication or in better transport of farming goods and everything like that, that can really get to their location easier than
Mhm.
how we have it, at least within Canada at the moment, which it is still pretty rudimentary in certain areas. Not very sure about the US, or certain parts of the US, or certain parts of the UK, for instance, or just Europe in general. But I do know with Canada, it is kind of rudimentary compared to where Amsterdam has taken and ran
Mhm.
with agriculture. So that's what we're going to talk about. What we're also going to talk about is money, just like how we've been talking about today. And also, how can it benefit you? Because at this very moment, we're talking about the larger scale,
Mhm.
universal basic healthcare, not healthcare, income, my apologies.
Mhm.
But the number one thing is that how can you, the viewer, benefit from watching our show? So we're also going to focus on money and investments and everything like that for
Mhm.
atheist viewers, so that the atheist
Perfect.
viewer can really
Yeah.
begin to think about what they can do with the money that they have now and everything like
Mhm.
that. What can they invest in? What is the best investment options that they can do? And that's what we'll focus on. The other thing is how to engage theists, for instance. I think that engaging theists in the way that Scott stated this in the beginning of our show, and how Katy stated during the beginning of our show, is the best way of engaging a theist, because theists aren't all just a one trick pony type of thing. There
Mhm.
are multiple functions that we need to engage in while engaging in different theists. And if we're constantly just throwing mud at each other, we're not getting anywhere, and we're not reaching that middle ground. However, sometimes we do need to start throwing punches when it comes to certain apologists that are out there and everything
Mhm.
like So that's the number one thing that we need to start looking at, and that we'll have future conversations for and everything like that. And the other thing is building a community that is viable for atheists as well, because there's communities all over the place. And yes, there are atheist communities, but they're not really talking about things that are fruitful for you, the viewer. They're mostly talking about how can you think about things philosophically. It is good to think philosophically, but not a lot of people want to go through that philosophical thing. You know,
Right.
a lot of people just want to be like, let me live myself, let me live and let me be me while moving through society. And the number one thing is that what most people just want is to have a fun community conversating and discussing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to try to get to you, the viewer, as well.
Yeah.
That fun discussion that we can have, and let alone serious discussions too. If there is any type of religious or economic or whatever circumstance that you're going through, we will have that discussion with you in order to try to help you overcome certain issues. Also, we'll have psychological conversations as well, because that's another thing that's really good. And Katy is excellent at having those type of discussions when it comes to psychology.
I wanted to actually jump in on this and say that I am actually studying social psychology, and this is what I want to also help with this community by doing a series of shows where I document my learning experience within the field of social psychology, and start using that knowledge to then develop studies and discussions based around the field of social psychology and how we can actually look at particular problems that we see within society, how we can start to think about them in a socially psychological way, address those issues and come up with solutions for those issues.
Absolutely. And Scott down here is great when it comes to epistemology and really talking and really getting down with the theists and really talking, meeting the theists on their ground or in the middle ground. And that's why Scott would be great, in my opinion, in order to slowly but surely start to help atheists get out of the mindset of just being confrontational and really get get to actually getting work done, which is to slowly but surely talk with the theists and really start to show the theists that are just laymen why there are certain ideas that they have might be irrational and how we can move forward from that. Because I think a more atheistic world is going to be a beneficial world for everybody. Because that would just mean that everybody will now slowly but surely, hopefully over time, will start to think logically and rationally about their decisions and everything like that. And then from there, we don't know what the future can bring. But and for me, I just love being the host and to really promote this movement and push this movement as hard as I can, as well as sometimes throwing those little punches at the apologists and everything like that, because for me, I'm more of the confrontational type myself. So all in all, we are starting to build this community for the benefit of you, the viewer, and future shows to come is really going to get I'm going to say exciting, because we are going to start having conversations that are definitely going to be beneficial for you and the community as a whole. And I really hope that tonight's show was fun, because it was really fun for me, and how we really had really great conversations about how to deal with this universal basic income. Yes, maybe for me, I push back a bit, but I think that it's good, because if everybody is kind of in agreement constantly, you're not.
You don't want to be in an echo chamber.
No, that's great.
Exactly. But it's not in a hostile way where anybody is pushing back. Is to really start thinking about how to make these ways and these functions work for the viewer, and also how we can sort of circle the how can I say it, the pointy ends, in a sense, of the idea to really make them make sense and to see if they actually work. So
exactly,
that's what the Atheist Uprising offers to you, the viewer. So I hope that you can come on next week, because we are going to have another interview coming down the pipeline with Dr. Josh. So it's going to be really fun, and we're going to really delve into Mesopotamia, which is, and we should say, the Sumerian culture, and how the Sumerian culture sort of bred the idea of the monotheistic ideology that we have today and that we're living in Western society and predominantly throughout the world. So it's going to be extremely fun. So please stay tuned for next Sunday. Have a great one. And before I do that, does anybody else have anything that they want to say? Last words before we end.
Good night.
Alrighty then. Everybody have a good night and see you next week.
All right. See you, man.
Where is my thing? Oh. And here we go.